Hello Tamers, and welcome to a Banlist slash Restriction Prediction video. As always, I'm Regina or Jigglypuff, and thanks so much for checking this video out. Now, World Finals for Bandai Games is coming up this weekend, and on the 16th, Bandai is planning to make a Banlist slash Restriction announcement update with plans to implement the actual announcement on the 28th of March. So, for those of you who are living in SoCal, this is 2 days before our Pasadena regionals. So hopefully a lot of the locals in the area are thinking of implementing the ban list before then so that players get a chance to practice. And a huge part of why Bandai is announcing it this weekend is, again, World Finals is happening this weekend for their games. And 2, global unification is coming up soon for Digimon, so they probably want all their players on the same page. Now, Bandai has shown in previous restriction and ban list updates that they are totally fine with hitting sets before they come out, as shown by 1, the Mega Digimon Fusion outright ban, and then 2, the EX5 announcement for Apocalypse and Anubismon that restricted them for a week after their actual release so people could play with it at nationals. So I think a lot of stuff is actually kind of up in the air for Bandai, and I really enjoy the potential chaos that is going to come from this. So this video is meant to kind of look at some of the decks that people are talking about and what cards I think might actually get hit in there, and then just for some fun at the end, some cards that I would hope come off the restriction list. So let's start with what decks are people expecting to get hit. So the big ones are going to be Mirage, whether that be Pure Mirage or Galaxy Loop, Purple Hybrid, Red Purple Imperial Digimon, Talmon Loop, and Gallantmon. And realistically, what do I think is going to actually get hit? Well, first off, I actually don't think Talmon Loop is going to get hit. I think Talmon Loop, or specifically the Shine Greymon Ruin mode that people are looking at, it is one of those decks where it's super impressive once they get into the loop, but the problem is getting into the loop in the first place. While the Talmon Ace helps facilitate a lot of that, you still need a lot of pieces of the puzzle to kind of slot in together to be able to pull off that loop. A huge part of it is making sure you have a Tamer, the Kuzuha Mon, the options that you need to go from Talmon into Kuzuha into Ruin mode, or Talmon into Tsukuyamon into Ruin mode. And a huge part of what it feels like is that the deck's own enemy, its worst enemy, is itself. So I actually don't think that just Shine Greymon or the Talmon Loop in general is going to be addressed or hit in this restriction update. I could absolutely be wrong, though, and I could just be playing the wrong loop players. But I personally don't really see it as much of an issue. Yeah, it sucks to play against it once they get their loop locked down. But I also think that it's not as terrible of a deck as some of the other ones floating out there. The other one that I actually think won't be impactfully hit is going to be Mirage. And this is because I sort of classify Mirage in the same way that I currently do for Melga or Blue Hybrid at the time. And for me, what that means is by the time that they touch those decks or they hit those decks, it was too little too late, right? They hit the decks after the format had shown that it no longer really saw them as a threat, after they were being outclassed by other decks that are faster. And in this case, I think Mirage is slowly tapering off, not quite as much, but it's being outpaced by other decks in the format. And so my hope is that they still address Mirage, but I think regardless of how they address Mirage now, I think it's going to be one of those where it's not it should have come earlier in a lot of ways. And my biggest issue with Mirage is that it punishes you for game actions that Bandai has built into the game now, which is searching for cards to further your game plan. So while I would love to see Mirage get hit in some way in this restriction update, I don't have any high expectations for it actually being addressed as such. The decks that I do see being addressed would be something like Purple Hybrid. Purple Hybrid is a very scary fast deck once it gets set up. It requires maybe 4 pieces, 3 or 4 pieces in actuality, right? You need your 2 level 4s, you need a Tamer, and you need your Jack Grades. And for me, the Tamer that you need the most is actually going to be the Matt Ishida. And for that reason, I think either the Matt Ishida or the Jack Grade from Purple Hybrid are going to be addressed in some way, because the Matt is what continues your Purple Hybrid game plan to keep going. And while Jack Raid extends the turns to be able to get the memory back so you can keep evoing, It's the mat that really facilitates that entire sort of game plan. And here's the thing. If you have memory, that's great, but sometimes you don't have things to do with that memory. And the mat has the on-play that lets you recur important pieces that you need for your game plan. If you're missing your 4s, you pick up your 4s from your trash. If you're missing the memory, you pick up the jack grades. And a lot of ways the mat is sort of the glue that binds that together. So I would like to see the mat be addressed in some way. I don't know how realistic that is as an expectation, because the purple mat is so good in other decks that if you hit it in one, it feels like you're hitting it in all of them, and it would feel like purple hybrid is punishing all the other decks for itself being such a good deck. So while I think the mat is the card that should be addressed, it might actually be the jack raid, because that one's an easier card to hit than it is for the mat. Is that like realistic? No, because I think that there is every bit of a chance that Bandai will just be like, no, we're just going to punish purple for the sins of purple hybrid in general. The mat is just a very, very good card. So the other decks that I am thinking of like seeing getting addressed, Gallantmon is one of them. Gallantmon players, I'm very happy for you in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways I mean that I have seen how this deck has struggled since its very early days to be a top deck with how much support it gets in almost every set, and EX8 finally helped push that deck over the edge. My issue is that I think it pushed it over the edge too much. The Gallantmon deck is an engine that is very fast. It is weirdly consistent in a lot of ways, and it reminds me of old Melga decks where they didn't really need a lot to win what felt like out of nowhere. And the two cards that I think help this out the most are going to be the Gallantmon X Antibody and the War Grandmon from BT12. The Gallantmon X Antibody felt too finely tuned as a card. I think the first time I read it, I went, you don't even need the X Antibody underneath for like the good effect, and it's so crazy. Of course, you get an extra bonus effect if you have the Gallantmon or an X Antibody tucked underneath it, which isn't a problem really for most Gallantmon decks, just because of the consistency of it. But I think that this deck needs to be, or this card specifically, needs to be addressed in either an errata or a restriction, because I think the X Antibody is just way too powerful. It's too good. It does so much for like what the card like has, and you don't even need the X Antibody for like some of it. That's ridiculous to me. The other card that I think is an issue is also the BT12 War Grandmon, and that's the one that lets you warp if you don't delete something. Sorry, not warp. It's the one that lets you evo into a Gallantmon if you don't delete something, and it's the one that has the inherit of at the end of the attack. If your opponent has no Digimon, you gain 2 memory. This is a card that just kind of has it all. It has removal, it has an extra evolution attached onto it, and it has memory gain. And I know some of you are probably screaming and being like, just run more floodgates. You mean the floodgates that are super easily removed by the removal in Gallantmon? Yeah, those floodgates, they don't really do much against this matchup sometimes, right? Like, you can slap all of them down, but it's almost like Gallantmon blinks and the entire board is gone. And even if you were to put down those cards, they have ways of using that deletion to their advantage, because they'll just gain more memory. So I think this is a card that either needs to just, I don't want to say fully banned, because it feels weird to say that since Bandai has only ever really done one full ban, but at least some sort of restriction. I mean, it's unfortunate because like they find that one card and they can win, but then their issue becomes trying to find that card, right? So I think for either of these cards, having a restriction would be nice, or some sort of errata when it comes to the Gallantmon X Antibody. But I think these are the two problematic cards inside of the deck. And now we move on to the big baddie of the ban list, or the restriction list, or this prediction video. And that would be Red Purple Imperial, which I think is really funny calling it the big baddie, because it is currently the big bad in the webtoon novel for Digimon Liberators. Now, Red Purple Imperial, you guys have the same problem that Gallantmon did. I'm very happy for all of you who have struggled since the beginning with Red Purple Imperial about that deck. Kudos to you for trying your best to make it work. And kudos to you for picking up your Shadowmon promos when they were cheap, because they are currently not. And speaking of Shadramon, it is actually one of the 2 cards that I think that should be addressed inside of this deck, the other one being the Wormmon. Now, a lot of people are probably not expecting Shadramon to get hit because it is a promo card, and on top of being a promo card, it just got announced as a reprint in Japan in their LM set, and as an event card here in the States, if I'm remembering correctly, or like in North America at least. And so there could be some like, oh, well, they're not going to hit it because it's a reprint, and they just announced it for that. And honestly, I don't know that that's on Bandai's radar for it, because the long-term health of the game might be more important to them than those specific like instances of those cards. What is one card as opposed to making sure that you have people who still want to stay in the game because of how oppressive a deck can feel. And when I say that I feel this deck is oppressive, I mean that in terms of you can do all you can to delete this Digimon and it will just come back, because the Shadramon Inherit just lets you be able to grab back something from your trash. And then the one Digivolving effect lets you play something out, so you can continue that loop, because the Shadramon with the Wormmon, both of those help facilitate a potential where you just go from your level 3 straight back up into your level 6, right? The DNA evolution just is honestly kind of crazy in this one. And I get it, right? Like Wormmon and Veemon have what I would like to call protagonist energy. In this case of the red-purple version, the antagonist energy. And so it should be a powerful deck. I think in this case it's too powerful. And as weird as it sounds, even though like I wouldn't mind them hitting the Shadramon, I actually think the Wormmon might be a little bit stronger because it has that start of main phase trigger. So you can do all you can to clear the board and be like, all right, awesome. But if they just hard play that Wormmon, or if they just promote it from the back, they can do it all over again. Even the Battle NPC card, even though some people might be playing it in their deck and some people might not, has a way of like, okay, you can tuck that Wormmon in underneath that Tamer as a failsafe just in case your entire board gets wiped. So for me, I think that the Wormmon is actually a little bit more of a problem than Shadramon. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit either or both. I don't think there's any hesitation in hitting promos for this one, and I would actually not be surprised if they chose to hit it regardless of the reprint announcement. So, but that's all the decks that I think have the potential to be hit for this weekend's announcement. Now, do I think we're going to get any unrestrictions? Probably not, but there are a couple ones that I would like to address that have the potential to be unrestricted and won't be a problem to the format anymore. And one of those is actually the most realistic one, I should say, is the Eismon, and that's the scatter mode and the regular Eismon. And the reason I think that both of those have the potential to be unrestricted is they are no longer the same problem that they used to be back when they had first come out. When Eismon Scatter Mode first came out, on deletion, Draw 3, Trash 2 was an actually ridiculous idea. It was so good. It was one of the few ways to filter purple consistently. And now that we are here years later in Digimon, it is one of those cards that is seemingly outclassed by a lot of new cards and a lot of new card design. So Eismon is very much a product of its like time in design. While it's still a good on deletion skill, losing the momentum like that for a level 4 just doesn't seem as worth it anymore. Yeah, you can hard slam it and that's totally fine and just get it next turn. But I actually also think that there's a lot of level 4s now that can outclass it, and that there's so many more options to use in place of the Eismon. The other thing that I think would be funny to unban would be Shoutmon X4. I know it's probably not going to happen, because if you were to unban Shoutmon X4, then all the new Shoutmon stuff would probably just fall to the wayside. And again, I don't think there's any problem with that. My thing is that Shoutmon X4 is just makes for a very fast cross-art deck. It's ridiculous. You just draw 2. Like, that's so funny. And you just do it consistently. And then you're like, cool, I'm going to delete this. And then you're going to do it all over again. The consistency for X4 is why I think it should probably stay restricted. But I think it would be funny if it were unrestricted. And then just the little silly one that I always hope for every single time is Hidden Potential discovered to be unrestricted. And I know that one will never happen, because if you give grade players HPD out of 4 of, it will be a nightmare. Like, actually a nightmare. That card is so ridiculous. I can't believe they ever designed it. That's so funny to me. Like, a 0 cost option that says, hey, suspend something, and then the next time you want one of your Digimon Evo, you can reduce the cost by 5. Like, it's so silly. It's so silly to me. Yeah, but green would be a menace if that card, like, was at a full 4 of. I would find room. I don't care what I would find room for that. But that's it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens this weekend, both in terms of what wins World Finals, what gets announced, and for some more Digimon news. I think it's always really fun just watching this. It's one of my favorite times of the year lately. And just let me know what you think is going to get hit this weekend. Let me know what you think would be unbanned. Were my predictions super off base? Am I absolutely crazy and I should just quit playing Digimon? Or just, what are your experiences and where do you think this restriction is going to take us? So, thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.